Welcome to this very special edition of the KJ Masterclass Live, the show which ensures that you profit from your time spent here with experts, either through the industry insights, information, or simply learning from them. And today we have Ricky Howard, CEO of DoD Contract, and he's a host of DoD Contract Academy podcast. Welcome to the show, Rick.
Thanks, AJ. Thanks for having me.
You are welcome. Welcome to the show. Welcome to India. And I'm sure a lot of people will benefit from what you are going to talk today, how small businesses can sell to the government, even to the US government. And we will focus on US government and the US small businesses, but also a lot of small business across the world can benefit from this. So first, to understand from you, Rick, is what is about this DoD contract. What a simple person should understand. What is DoD?
Well, DoD is the Department of Defense. And although I have DoD contract in, the title of my podcast, in my business, I came from the DoD, as an acquisitions officer. So I was putting companies on contract for the government. However, we help all companies sell to all agencies within the federal government. So whether we're talking about the Department of Defense or Homeland Security, there are a variety of agencies, and they buy and have a mandate to buy from small businesses. Right.
You were in the U.S. Air Force 20 years, and
That's
now
right.
you are helping small businesses to take off so to the skies.
That's right. I gotta have you do my marketing from now on. These are some taglines I need to add to my my website here.
Yeah, this is original. While I was doing research, I just thought of it and thought, why not you use it? Because it just, it so much gels with what you did earlier on and what you are doing right now. Because that's a lot of, suggestions and help people need, especially small businesses. In India, we've got millions of small businesses and government is trying to help them as much as possible. But things like this can be a great, not just morale booster, but also profit booster for a lot of businesses, not just in India, but also outside. To understand from you, Rick, is that you say that variety of small businesses are winning federal contracts in the USA. So firstly, for the audience sake, help us understand, can outside businesses, small businesses, foreign companies, foreign businesses, small businesses bid for US contracts, especially the DoD, US Department of Defense contracts? And what are the areas that contracts are available for people? Is it different for the US companies? Is it different for outside? For obvious reasons, US companies, it's a bit because it's a defense matter. So how does it work so that people inside the US, a lot of our audience is also in the US, and people outside the US, especially small businesses, can see what works for them, which are the areas that they can, bid for contracts in the US government?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And so first, the answer is yes to both. So yes, businesses from outside of the U.S. can bid on contracts, and small businesses inside the U.S. that are U.S.-owned small businesses can bid on contract opportunities with the U.S. government. Now, there are some restrictions. If you are a small business or large business that is not U.S.-owned, and a lot of those restrictions will be dependent on the opportunity. But I think, taking a step back to answer, I think, your question in full, is just to look at U.S. spending in general, right? So the U.S. will say that we are the single biggest purchaser of goods and services in the world, meaning the U.S. government. The U.S. government has a mandate it's around 23%. The Small Business Association decides what their actual criteria is going to be for each federal agency. But a percentage of all of the U.S. contracts have to be with small businesses. And so that's something that's not very understood, and it's not understood by U.S. small businesses either. Another thing to think about is that the U.S. government buys everything. So we're not just talking about weapons, AJ, and things, airplanes and jets, things that we're seeing in the news, right? The U.S. government, especially when we're talking about the Department of Defense, every military base is essentially a small town, or in some cases a small city, depending on what base we're talking about. So it needs all of the infrastructure that a normal base would need, right? And this is just in the Department of Defense. So everything from, lawn care services to cybersecurity and IT professionals that are working on the base, in the buildings, construction, there's police and hospitals and restaurants and things on these bases. So everything that goes into that needs to be purchased. And so the US government is purchasing those. And a lot of that's going to be through small businesses. Now, I think one thing for whether it's for your foreign small businesses or the US small businesses, you want to go to sam.gov is the place that you're going to register your business. So there's a couple extra hoops to jump through if you're a foreign business, if you're a small business, but they can go through the process of registering their company to sell to the US government.
Right. So while I was reading, I was getting the feeling that even a lot of US small businesses do not know about this aspect of it and not able to fully take benefit of the opportunities or the contracts available in the Department of Defense. Why is it that? Because who knows better than you? You are, I would say, industry insider. And secondly, which are the industries people generally think of a Department of Defense that, oh, it is all about supplying aeroplanes on those big fighters and all those big heavy duty machines that they may require. And what will a small business do? That's a normal, can be a myth, which is not correct all the time. So help small businesses understand that there are other areas that they can actually bid for contracts. Can you clear some of the mystery or the myth that people carry on for themselves? Even for outside businesses, people generally don't tend to apply for their own local, their own national Department of Defense contracts, feeling maybe it needs a lot of, push to understand. And you need to know somebody there, and then only it will work. Help us understand this part from both sides.
Yeah, you're right to say that even in the U.S., there's small businesses have a lack of awareness of the opportunity. And just to talk about some of the facts, less than half of 1% of all of the U.S. small businesses, and last time I checked, it was a little over 33 million small businesses in the U.S. Less of half of 1% are actually selling to the U.S. government. Now, when we start talking about the types of things that the government buys, I mean, this could be anything from accounting services, legal services. It could be IT, cybersecurity, like I mentioned, landscaping earlier. In fact, I've been challenged to come up with something that the U.S. government doesn't buy, and that's actually a pretty hard thing to actually for me to find. So depending on what it is, if we're talking about things that are going to be like cybersecurity, professional information services, those things are usually in more high demand from not just the DoD, but the other agencies as well. But I mean, things like medicine, things like hospital supplies, office supplies. I mean, anything that a regular office environment would need to operate, those are the type of things that they're going to need. And literally the list, there's thousands of things, thousands and thousands of things that the U.S. government's buying. So we got to take it, by a case-by-case basis. If you're selling piano lessons, for instance, I could probably find where the government's buying that, but you're not going to be looking at $1 million piano lesson contract with the government, right? Same thing with like Tai Chi lessons, which the government buys fitness programs and fitness equipment. So again, there's a lot there that the government's buying. It's just having the awareness that they're buying that. And that's one problem. That's one reason that not a lot of, and by the way, small business participation in the U.S. has been declining over the past 10 years, even though the government's spending more and more money every year, and they have to, by law, put this money on contracts with small businesses. So in essence, you have fewer and fewer small businesses winning more and more of the contracting dollars. And so one of the things we're trying to do is make people aware that there is an opportunity here. And also, I guess one of the challenges, one of the reasons that you don't see a lot of the participation is the government the U.S. government cannot buy the same way you or I can buy something, right? They can't just go to the Toyota dealership and buy a car from somebody they know. There has to be a competitive process. There are thousands of pages of regulations that exist to ensure that there's fairness and competition, and that the government's doing their due diligence to ensure that not only is there nothing inappropriate going on, but that the government's also paying fair prices for, whether it's for products or fair wages for services, that type of thing.
Right. So now you have actually given so much of information about the type of different things that any Department of Defense or their military may require in terms of their use. It is like everyday life where people need things, except for some
Yeah.
of the things which are much more of the technical sort and sophisticated sort. So in terms of a small business in any other part of the world, we may understand, okay, some of the rules people don't understand, but in the us is known for transparency. A lot of things are available for everyone. So why is it that still there is a less degree of awareness, especially amongst small businesses, to bid for the DoD contracts? One is that.
Well,
Second is, yeah, carry on. Then we'll take the other one.
no, I
Yeah.
was going to say, I mean, you're right about the transparency piece, because a lot of the rules that exist around this exist for just that purpose. So there are a variety of government websites you can go to look at spending, and this actually makes it, because there's challenges with the federal selling to the federal government, right? Like, for instance, the timeline is typically longer if you're selling to the government, but the contracts can be more lucrative and stable with the government, and there's lots of great reasons to have a government line of income coming into your business, in addition with a regular commercial line, right? So as the economy fluctuates, you might lose a government contract but have your commercial line of income coming in, or you could have skyrocketing inflation and start seeing a drawdown of some of your commercial income, where your government contract is still providing you, is unaffected for the most part, and still providing you that income on a yearly basis. If, like, let's say, for example, that you have a 3-year contract with one of the agencies, that's going to be something pretty stable that you can count on. Now, if we're talking about some of the other complexities with selling to the government, I think there's one thing that I focus on with our clients, which is a plus, and that's that transparency piece. If you know where to go, we can see how the government buys. So we can see what agencies are buying the product or service that you're selling. We can see exactly who they're buying from. We could take a look at one of your competitors, and we could map out very specifically what their first contract was, who it was with, how much it was for, all the way to what they're doing now. We can get a really solid idea of how much you could expect to make year over year if you figure out the right method to sell to the government, and you're consistent and you're applying the principles that really most successful businesses are, whether small or big, that are successfully selling to the U.S. government.
Right, Vicky. So after listening to you, a U.S. small business wants to apply for U.S. Department of Defense contract. How do they get started? One is that proposal part. Then they have the feeling that, okay, we are a small business, we need to compete with the big companies. So how do they get started?
Yeah, so the first thing, you need to be registered to put a proposal into the government. So you have to have your company registered through sam.gov. And like I mentioned, there's a few things. If you're a foreign business, there are a few things that you're going to have to do that a U.S. small business isn't going to have to look at. And again, these are also dependent on opportunities, right? So there might be more restriction around anything like a software tool or something that's going to connect to the internet or a government system, for instance, right? So, but having said that, you're going to register your business. And I want anybody listening to avoid some of the big mistakes that companies make when they first start selling to the government. This is the reason a lot of companies quit. A lot of small businesses quit, even large businesses quit, is because they see solicitations where the government's asking for a proposal, right? Let's say it's for services, right? Let's say it's for accounting services, right? So the government wants 20 people to provide accounting services at, you pick your military installation. And so you put a proposal together, which is a lot of work, and then you don't win. Well, one of the interesting things about the federal acquisitions process is before that solicitation comes out, there's something called the market research phase. And this is a phase where small businesses can interact with the government on most opportunities, where they can have conversations, they can talk to the government about, hey, this is what our company does, and this is what we think should be in the solicitation coming up. We think these are the requirements. Maybe you have certain certifications that the people that are providing those services have, or maybe you have certain past performance, or maybe you're a woman-owned small business, or you're a veteran-owned small business, and you think the government should set aside that solicitation, because that's something the government does, is they will set aside certain contracts for small businesses and certain types of small businesses. You can recommend all of these things during that market research phase. But once that solicitation comes out, you're not recommending anything. The handcuffs are on. The government has to be very careful about not having conversations with some companies and not with others at that point, because that shows preference, and then there could be award protests and all these other things. So what I would say is it's critical for small business to use the transparency that exists, find out who in the government, what agencies and what offices buy what you sell, figure out how they buy what you sell, and have a target, very focused, 1, 2, 3 agencies top when you're first getting it started. And you want to find opportunities before the solicitation comes out. So before the request for proposal, before the request for quote, we want to find the opportunities in those agencies that we're targeting, so we can set up meetings, and so we can talk to those offices, talk to them a little bit more about the requirements, see if you're a good fit, right? See if maybe you should be partnered with another business when you go in for one of these opportunities. And it also gives you that, as I mentioned earlier, it gives you that ability to influence how the government's going to make a purchase. In some cases, that ends up being a sole source contract with some businesses if what they have a unique solution or a unique technology. But more often, it's still going to be competed, but you're more likely to win because you have the relationship, you've influenced it to a certain extent, and you have if you've talked to the office, you have a better understanding of what the government needs. And at the end of the day, that's really where you're going to bring value. If you spend some time trying to understand what the government needs, what their requirement is, and you lean forward to try to present the best solution possible, that's really where you're going to land government contracts and see some success in this area.
Okay. So networking in outside business is a good thing, but networking inside the government is not a great thing for any business, because that will be leading to the accusations of preference. So networking is out, or it still works?
No. Networking is in. Networking is in, AJ. So relationships matter. There's a certain point where you can't talk to the office, but the government office knows when that point is, and it's usually when the solicitation is coming out, right? It's before that. The government has, for instance, they have conferences, they have industry days that happen before the solicitation comes out. And this is where, because the government needs to talk to industry just to figure out how to solve some problems, right? There are some technical problems out there that the government, like for instance, when I was a program manager, I flew for the first half of my career. The second half of my career, I was an acquisitions officer. So when I first stepped into that role where I was going to be putting companies on contract for the government, I was learning the process of how you do that, right? But I was not a subject matter expert in everything that I had to put.
Sorry to interrupt you, Rick. I was seeing those numbers. You oversaw $82 billion plus DoD contracts. Means I have not seen even more than $2,000 once altogether in my life. At one time, and this is $82 billion. I am not able to even figure out how much is that money.
Well, keep in mind, I didn't have all that money sitting on my desk, AJ. So there are a lot of people involved with a number of contracts because it's a team, right? So it's usually not one person that owns all of that. So I was part of a team that was managing those contracts. And yeah, we managed a lot of different contracts in a lot of different areas. So, throughout my career, I did get a lot of experience in a lot of different areas on working with small and large businesses alike.
Right. So networking is in, but still out. So let's leave that out for the moment. So what are the resources available, which is, available to anybody, but especially small businesses can look at that and take those first steps for themselves?
Sure. Here's what I'd recommend. First, go to sam.gov, start reading through sam.gov. That's a U.S. government website. That's where you register your business. You can learn a lot about both U.S.-based businesses and small businesses that are foreign-owned, what you'll have to do in order to sell to the government. The next resource that's free that I would recommend is the Small Business Association, SBA.gov, another great website where you can learn a lot about how you can sell to the government as a small business. And finally, our podcast, the DoD Contract Academy podcast, it's free. And we interview small businesses that are selling to the government. We interview government contracting officers and former government contracting officers, program managers, and then you get me ranting on different issues. But you can learn a lot about the process just by listening to that. And of course, our website, dodcontract.com, that's another resource they can go to. We have our page with a lot of the blogs and interviews that we've done. We also have courses. And then for, companies that are a little bit further along that are looking for our help, then we can help them and they can set up a consultation.
Right. Good you mentioned that. I was about to ask you on that. So you already talked about the podcast, Academy podcast. You are a host there and you host the shows. So in terms of your company, what role does it play or can it play for small businesses if they want to seek outside help? Will that be taken as, approaching the government? How does, because sometimes if you employ a lobbying firm, then that can be looked at differently. In the US, I know lobbying is still okay. In other countries, it is not okay. So
Yeah.
How does that work out, especially for foreign firms, lest they fall, foul of all these rules and regulations are not able to bid? How does that work out
Sure.
for a small business?
Well, what I tell you is first, we have a course that people can take, they can pay for, where we take them step by step through a lot of this process. But we're very careful about how we work with businesses. And I can tell you, whether it's a large business or a small business, the first thing we do to help companies is putting together that strategic plan, that step-by-step roadmap based on federal spending. And that does a lot of things. That can tell you, should you even be trying to sell to the government? How hard is it going to be? How much can you make? You can figure out how much the government's spending and what an average small business is making. And you get that step-by-step process. So, okay, this is how we're going to do it. This is how the government buys what I sell. And that is one of our primary engagements, is giving real advice to companies that, no fluff. Like, this is, because it's hard work selling to the government. And we want to be crystal clear with businesses on what they have to do to be successful. And if they follow those steps, typically they will be. But that's how we engage with companies, at least on the outset.
Right. So in terms of small business, when people want to get help and to try and understand the government process, local US companies as well as outside, what would you like to tell small businesses in terms of things they should be aware of, that they are not taken for a ride by there are many people in this whole process, and maybe some outside elements can, try to misguide you. What are the things that they should look out for and save themselves?
Yeah. So what I would say is, selling to the government isn't, it's not a quick win. It's not winning the lottery. It does take work. It takes a little bit longer to win a government contract than it does selling commercially. However, selling to the government can be a major source of revenue for your business. Usually I recommend to businesses, especially small businesses, that they get their commercial line of sales in order and get past performance there before they approach government, because they are going to have to work for, I tell people, 12 to 18 months before you can expect to land your first government contract. And that's if you're doing everything right from the beginning. It can take longer than that. And it can be faster too, just depending. But that's what I would tell you. Be aware of the timeline. Do what you need to make your company successful in the meantime, in order so you have an income coming in. And then when you get your government, you start winning your first government contracts, then you can start building your government team as you go along. Let the government fund that as you start winning more and more contracts, and build it over time. It's a marathon, not a sprint.
Right. It's a marathon, not a sprint. What about the money part? Does it come in the form of a marathon, or does it come sprinting to you?
Well, that depends. That depends on what you're selling, right? So if you're on a 3-year services contract, you'll be billing the government most likely as you go along, versus you might sell, automobiles or something else to the government, where you might get paid all, up, I don't want to say up front, but, at the beginning of the transaction. So it could be more transactional. So it really just depends on what you're selling.
Absolutely. Really all depends on what you are selling, but one should be prepared for the long haul. And in terms of your also look at the cash flow. So
that's right.
Right. So with this, it's a wrap on this very special edition of the KJ Masterclass Live. Thank you so much indeed for joining us.
Thank you, sir.